All right. So imperialism. What is imperialism? That is when the United States, that means expansionism. When you're expanding your territory, expanding your influence. And in the 1800s, late 1800s, we went through this wave of imperialism where not just the United States, but all countries were trying to compete for land and influence and domination around the world. So, yes, expansionism. We've seen this before. You may not be very familiar with what this stands for, but you will at the end of the PowerPoint when I show it to you again. Okay. So remember, before we started to expand, we were first all about isolationism, keeping to ourselves. We didn't want to expand our territory. We didn't want to get involved with other countries. We were focusing on ourselves, right? So isolationism and imperialism are complete opposites, okay? But we broke the isolationism period around this time, and we realized that it is important to be imperialistic. First of all, economically, it made sense. We wanted markets around the world. We wanted to start getting American goods all over the place and using other countries for cheap labor and natural resources also. So China was one of the main ones that we were imperialistic with. There are other political factors. We just wanted to have an empire. We wanted to have naval bases around the world. If we're going to be trading, doing business with other countries, then we need to have our Navy all over the world for quick access to any type of conflict that can happen. Cultural factors. We believe that we were the superior culture, that we were probably the best, country that had all the best ideals, and we wanted to spread our culture. We wanted to spread Christianity. We wanted to spread democracy and other political freedoms around the world. So that was another thing that motivated us to just kind of getting outside of our isolated bubble. Alfred T. Mahan, he's super important. He was a really big supporter of imperialism. And he was an admiral. He wrote this book about how it's important to be imperialistic. And if you're going to do that, you need to have a powerful Navy to compete with other countries who are also imperialistic. We got Hawaii in 1898. That was easy. That was just something that they did, and it led to annexation. And, then we were able to put a naval base, our largest naval base at the time, in Hawaii, out there in the middle of nowhere. It was supposed to be hidden. Later on, it gets bombed during World War II. Remember when we learned about the Monroe Doctrine? That was a warning to European countries that they must stay out of the Western Hemisphere, which is out of the Americas. Well, we ended up fighting a country for that, which we fought Spain in the Spanish-American War. And it was within 1 year. It only lasted 4 months. It was not even that long. It was an easy win for us. This is where Theodore Roosevelt gets his name, where he becomes famous. So some of the causes of the Spanish-American War, Cubans, they were still under Spanish control. There was still slavery. They needed our help. We came to their aid. Yellow journalism. American journalists were just, they were up in everyone's business, the Spanish-American War, exposing everything, rallying Americans up, exaggerating stories, and it really encouraged us to fight Spain for different reasons. The Delome letter, it was an insult on our president, President McKinley, it was a letter from the Spanish ambassador to the King of Spain, and basically it really upset us, and it added fuel to the fire because of the tensions. And then there was an explosion of the USS Maine that happened. It was our ship, USS Maine, in Cuba, and it exploded, and, American journalists blamed the Spanish. It was all over the newspapers, and it really encouraged us to go to war. So those were all the causes. And then war happens. Theodore Roosevelt, like I said, becomes famous. He was a Rough Rider. He was a general in the military, or he was a high-ranking leader in the military. And he recruits a whole bunch of volunteers from Texas and other places, and they become very victorious, especially at the Battle of San Juan Hill. Just make sure you know that, Battle of San Juan Hill. And like I said, the war was over within 4 months. We fought it in Cuba, we fought it in the Philippines, and that was it. So after the war was over, Cuba gets its independence, but they have to be a protectorate of the United States, meaning we must you know, I don't want to say control it, but it kind of was like we were controlling Cuba. But and then Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Guam were ceded to the United States. They all became colonies or territories of the United States. After the war was over, trade increased with all these new colonies that we acquired. That's an important thing, and we become a world power because now we have an empire overseas, and we fought another country that was a world power. So 1898 is important for us becoming a world power, fighting the Spanish Americans. I mean, fighting the Spanish American War and getting Hawaii. So there's two significant things to the year 1898. So 1898, us expanding, and these are the colonies that we got, or the territories we got during that time. China and the open door policy. So China, like I said, we were trading with China. We put markets in China at this time. And this was during a time when everybody saw that China was valuable. Everybody wanted to do business with China. Everybody was fighting over China. And we came up with this really cool open door policy where China agreed and other countries agreed that we would all split China evenly. We would all do trade business with them, and it was a good thing because that really put us on the map for being able to make diplomatic decisions, with other countries. So Panama, that's another topic. Remember, we're talking about how we were involved around the world. So Panama, remember there was a need for a shortcut through, Central America, Latin America, because we used to have to go all the way around South America to get from one side of the ocean to the other, to get to China, in other words. So we built this shortcut. It took about 8 years. We chose Panama because Panama is the most narrow part of the hemisphere. And there was already a lake there, so it wasn't that big of an issue. Teddy Roosevelt is the one who initiated the Panama Canal, so that is something that you have to know about Teddy Roosevelt. And we mentioned that there were a lot of problems, a lot of obstacles to building the Panama Canal, right? Mountainous, rainforest climate, uneven water levels, tons of mosquitoes that had diseases that were killing the workers. And then it was expensive. It was extremely expensive, but we got our money back in the end because we were able to charge a toll. And we had this canal all the way up until, well, you guys should know this because you just learned it in the Ed puzzle, all the way up until, good, up until December 31st, 1999. Yeah, basically, yeah. We just kind of finished off the century with it, and then, yeah, we turned it over to Panama without any compensation. Isn't that crazy? But we had gotten a lot of money back, so it was no big deal, like through the tolls. All right, so the Monroe Doctrine, a new topic. Now, remember, well, actually, I just mentioned the Monroe Doctrine. It said that Europeans have to stay out of the Americas. Now, that was in 1823. In 1904, we add on to the Monroe Doctrine and we say, not only do we not want you over here trying to claim land, trying to control developing countries like Latin American countries, we are willing to use military force to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. And we're going to use our military, the big stick is a metaphor for our Navy, which was our pride and joy, the Great White Fleet at the time. This is Theodore Roosevelt's policy. So you can't mess with Theodore Roosevelt. He's willing to fight you. He's willing to threaten and use, like I said, military force to get what he wants. All right, so that's all imperialism. And I need to mention one more thing that goes with imperialism, one more topic, and that's World War I, because this is how we break isolationism. We're going to take a break in a little bit. I just need to kind of go through this really fast. Sometimes my breaks last too long, and then I regret it. So let me just knock this out. All right, give me a second. Let me take a sip of water and coffee. Ow. Okay, let's see. Let me share the right screen. All right, World War One. This is extremely important. You will be tested over world wars. It's a big part of U.S. history, right? So I don't know what they're gonna test you on. So let's just make sure we have the main ideas of the war. I'm gonna skip a lot of stuff of World War One and just kind of hit things that I've always seen on the STAR exam. Okay. So first of all, be familiar with the years. That's another important date, 1914 to 1918. But we don't join. The U.S. doesn't join until 1917, and then the war is over the following year. So remember the main causes of World War One? Militarism, right? Building up your military and your navy and weapons. Alliances, countries teaming up, right? Nationalism. Oh, I skipped one. It has to be in order. Oh, because it's mania. Okay. Imperialism, which is countries expanding, fighting for territory around the world dominance. And nationalism, the fact that the countries thought were so patriotic, so prideful, it was causing tensions because they're all bordering countries in Europe, right? And then there was a spark, something that sparked the war, and it was the assassination of an archduke that had an alliance with Germany, and that is how war begins, once this person gets assassinated. So remember, our policy at the beginning of the war, when we found out about it going on in Europe, we were like, we're neutral, we're not picking a side, we're isolated, we're keeping to ourselves. I'm sorry, we can't get involved. This is not our war, it's your war. But then we end up getting in, like I said, a few years later, right? Because of some events. So one, Germany was unstoppable. They were the only one that had a U-boat, a submarine. They were using it to their advantage. They were very careless, irresponsible. A lot of people were dying just because they were shooting any ships down. And we basically chose a side. We're like, we need to stop Germany, right? And then because of their unrestricted submarine warfare, they sink a ship, a British ship that had Americans on there, and that really upset us, even though we had weapons underneath and we really were helping the British out. But they didn't know that, or maybe they did. And then the Zimmerman telegram, this was our final draw. They sent a letter to Germany. Germany sent a letter to Mexico trying to encourage them to attack the United States. And then we knew where their intentions were at. So we were like, okay, now we have to get involved, right? So this is 1917, and this is the year we joined. So those are all the reasons why we get in. And whenever we go through a major war, everything changes. For the first time, we used propaganda in this war to try to get Americans to be supportive with the war effort, and it worked. All right, so propaganda, there are different types of propaganda. First of all, the government was rationing items, putting limits on what we can buy. And there were all these posters, these propaganda posters to just get Americans to just support it, go along with it. We're trying to get Americans to grow their own gardens because crops were being rationed. We're getting Americans to buy war bonds, giving a loan to the government, which would be given back. Many Americans did it. Unemployment decreased, which means everybody was working. A lot of people had jobs. Women were working. African Americans were working, while most men were away fighting. Now, this was the first war we had a draft. So that's a Selective Service Act. You've been selected to serve your country. We've had one during World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War, which you got to know that. And of course, on the STAR, they don't say draft, they say Selective Service Act. So just make sure you're familiar with that. And you can tell, look at the year 1917, the year that we joined. We had new types of military technologies, mainly because of industrialization. We just went through this revolution worldwide, right? And also, countries were building up their weapons. So we had airplanes, submarines, which are U-boats, machine guns, poison, mustard gas, trench warfare, tanks. All these things were used for the first time in a war, and it caused massive casualties, a lot of deaths, more deaths than any other wars before in that short time period. Remember I mentioned no man's land? That was a land in between dug up trenches in which was all barbed up, trapped. And that usually caused stalemates in this war, where stalemate is where nobody's really making any progress. It's just a long period of no fighting. And then when we joined the war, When we joined the war, the soldiers that were drafted and sent to the front lines, they were called the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force, led by John J. Pershing. The Battle of Argonne Force is the only one you have to know for World War I. It was the turning point battle. We defeated the Axis powers, not the Axis, the Central Powers. Axis is World War II. But we defeat the Central Powers, and then after that, the war ends the same year, 1918. Alvin York, he received the Medal of Honor for bravery. And then the Treaty of Versailles, the famous Treaty of Versailles that was signed the following year, ended the war, punished Germany severely, and it is the main cause of World War II. All right, so this, World War I caused World War II mainly because of this treaty. So what were Germany's punishments? Land taken away, their entire empire. They could not have a military or a navy. They had to take full blame of the war, which is basically all the other ones. And they had to pay war reparations. They had to pay payments, make payments to the Allies for the damages that they caused in the form of $33 billion. And when Hitler rises to power, he breaks this treaty in every single way. And those were his intentions. And that's why it's a cause. President Woodrow Wilson, our president at the time, he came up with, 14 ideas for world peace. But the main one that you have to know is number 14, the League of Nations. It was an organization of countries that would come together and they would promise to be peaceful. It ended up not working out. We didn't join, unfortunately, because it couldn't get approved by Congress. But today it's called the United Nations. So that was his idea that turned out to work in the long run. But we didn't join the League of Nations and we didn't sign the Treaty of Versailles because it seemed like an alliance and we didn't want Germany to want to have revenge on us. And we just wanted to go back to isolationism, just going back to just keeping to ourselves and not having any type of connection with European countries because they're very unstable. They're always at war with each other. And one more time, remember, women were so supportive. They get the 19th Amendment, suffrage, right? The right to vote in 1919. So that is what I wanted to talk about. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and look at this right here. Let me see. So if you've been studying your book, then you've already, this all should be familiar. It takes a while to load. Then we've covered, if we look back at this timeline, we did Gilded Age and Westward Expansion. They're grouped together last Thursday. And then the Progressive Era, we just did right now, a little while ago, and Imperialism and World War I. So we'll look at some questions. I'll give you a little bit of practice or an opportunity to practice. And then we'll look at Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. And then I'll see if I can go over the dates with you guys. Okay? So what I want you, so we basically covered all the way up into right here, this page. Page 11. No, page 12. Now you should be reading, reviewing, memorizing, I don't know, this right here. If you don't want to go back and look at the PowerPoints, then this is just kind of a shortened review for you of the main ideas that I just kind of covered. Now I skipped some stuff because like I said, it's all important, but if it's something that doesn't come out a lot on the STAR, then I kind of skipped it because I was like, well, there's other things that I need to focus on and I'm limited on time. So yeah, just make sure you go through all this. If you don't know the Zimmerman telegram, if you don't know the Battle of Argonne Forest, if you don't know the League of Nations, Treaty of Versailles, make sure to read this because it's all here. All right, so you should be doing this. This is just like practice, like quizzing yourself. I've already told you that it's not for a grade, it's good practice for you. I mean, if you want to know these topics, this is how you're forced to learn because you're really trying to figure out what are the descriptions that go with these terms, and then you can go and look them up. So that's a good way. And then you have an answer key. I uploaded it, so you can check. I think I uploaded it. I don't know. Now that I think about it. So progressive era, that's what we talked about. Muckrakers, right? The journalists that expose problems to society. Upton Sinclair. I think we already learned Jane Addams. You should know what a monopoly is. Andrew Carnegie, Rockefeller. This is the same one. This one's all imperialism. The Spanish American War specifically, right? Yellow journalism, DeLome letter, USS Maine, Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, open door policy. And this is the same one. And then this one right here has World War I, included Panama Canal, League of Nations, causes of World War I. That's the same one. And this one has World War I and Roaring Twenties. Some of them are repeated, like you might do one quiz and then you go down to the next one and then you're like, you see the same terms. The more you see it, the more likely you are to remember it, okay? So I am going to give you guys, let's see. I guess 7 minutes to kind of practice with this, okay? Of course, this is supposed to be done on your own, but I want to give you a chance to like just take a break from me talking. 7 minutes, and then I'm gonna go back to the Roaring Twenties one that I want to cover with you, okay? So starting right now. All right, guys, we are going to look at the Roaring Twenties PowerPoint right now and the Great Depression. And then we'll take another little break. Elizabeth, I saw your message from earlier and I just responded right now. Okay. All right, the Roaring Twenties. This is kind of an easy era, in my opinion. So the Roaring Twenties has a bunch of different names. The Jazz Age, the Harlem Renaissance, the era of Prohibition, right? So much was going on in the 1920s. So here are all the main characteristics that are in this PowerPoint. So we first started off with this Red Scare right after World War I, right? Because World War I ended in 1918, the treaty was signed in 1919, soldiers come back, and then things were really bad. Like the economy wasn't very stable, there was high inflation, high unemployment, there was rioting and things like that. And we went through this communist scare where we thought our country was going to be overthrown, the government, and we were going to turn communist. So we've had two Red Scares, World War I, right after World War I, and one right after World War II. So because of that, we realized that a lot of the terrorist attacks that were going on around this time were coming from immigrants. So there was a push to start limiting immigration because we had open immigration. Anybody could come to the United States. So the immigrants, and that was with the quota system where they were just putting like a percentage on which immigrants can come from which country. But anybody with radical ideas was being limited. So countries from Eastern Europe, like Russia, because Russia was communist, Southern Europe, and Western Asia, or like another name for Southwest Asia, like the Middle East. So we started to limit immigrants into the United States. All right, so that's a big part of the 1920s. The Scopes monkey trial, that was a trial that really kind of defined the modern way of thinking. It was like modernism versus traditionalism, like the new idea of being open to evolution as a possibility for how life created, or traditionalism that God created mankind. And it was just a huge debate that went on for a while, and that's that. The Harlem Renaissance, the Jazz Age, right? So the Harlem Renaissance is the revival of African American culture. It started with a great migration of African Americans that left the South because of all the discrimination that was in the South, segregation. They moved to the North, to cities where there were jobs. And then from there was this revival of African American culture. A lot of them were talented that moved to the North. So we had the Harlem Renaissance is just the revival of music. Jazz music was something that was started in the 1920s. A famous person is Louis Armstrong. He was a famous jazz player. of the time, originally from New Orleans. That's where jazz originated, but the Harlem Renaissance is in the north, though. And then we have a revival in art, new types of art, very colorful, and it depicts the time, jazz music, prohibition, things like that. And then literature, there was a revival in literature where African Americans were really shining and, just kind of being very motivational for other African Americans to kind of be themselves and show their talents. So, and Langston Hughes is a famous poet, African American poet of the Harlem Renaissance. Prohibition meaning alcohol was prohibited. It wasn't allowed. Now, it was only for, a short time, right? Because alcohol, it just didn't work. So that was the 18th Amendment, like I had mentioned earlier, that prohibited alcohol. And then we know that the women gained the right to vote at the same time. They're passed one year after another. So women are happy that they're getting what they want. And there's a new type of woman of the 1920s, and that's the flapper. A woman who's just very outgoing and free and independent and kind of breaking all the traditional norms of the time, right? Wearing short fluffy dresses, wearing makeup and jewelry and dancing and strappy dresses and things like that. Also part of the 1920s, I had mentioned that because alcohol was prohibited, doesn't mean that people stopped drinking alcohol. It actually increased organized crime. It increased bootlegging. So people like Al Capone were around, making alcohol more possible for people. Speakeasies, these were underground nightclubs where alcohol was sold very secretly. And then after 13 years, the noble experiment ends and alcohol comes back. It's legal again, but with the new drinking age, 21, right? So 21, 21st Amendment. Politics. Now, some presidents of the time. We started off the 1920s with President Warren Harding. He dies really early in his presidency, within like 3 years. He doesn't get to finish his first term. He won because of this idea. He was running against Woodrow Wilson, but he won on the idea of let's return to normalcy. Let's go back to isolationism, keep to ourselves. And people liked that idea because they were so traumatized with World War I. And but there was a lot of corruption, a lot of scandals, like the Teapot Dome scandal, which was an oil scandal that happened. And when that happened, many Americans started to lose trust and confidence in their government and didn't want to have anything to do with their government. So we went through this laissez-faire economy. That was with the next president, Calvin Coolidge, where this president just kind of was like, I'm going to lay back. I'm just going to let the economy run its own. I'm not going to be in people's businesses. That's what the people want. I want them to love me and trust me. And that's what happened. And the economy flourished. It boomed. Everyone was working. Everyone had a job. People were getting raises. People were spending their money like crazy. Henry Ford around this time becomes really big because he mass produces automobiles for average Americans. The Model T was his very first vehicle that was used by the assembly line process, which was, now everything is made by the assembly line, but he was the first to do it with automobiles, which made it affordable for Americans. Charles Lindbergh becomes the first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean solo by himself, and that was a major accomplishment for the United States. He made world news. And then we have all these cool, plus tons more of inventions and innovations that made life so much easier, but it got people spending lots of money they didn't have. So this new idea of buying on credit was introduced in the 1920s. And you just put a little down payment and then you make installment plans, which are payment plans. That got people in a lot of debt. That caused a lot of problems. And at the end of the 1920s, we closed this really cool, fun decade, prosperous decade with a crash that happened in 1929. October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday. And everything, we go through a Great Depression right after that. Hey guys, let's go ahead and learn the dates. So it's super important that we know these dates because I did tell you that, you will get dates on the STAR exam, but, you're not going to get questions on the STAR that are going to be like, you know, what happened in 1898? You might get a question that will say, it will have the date, and it might say something like, in 1898, the United States became a world power after. So do you see what I mean? So if you know what happened in 1898, the Spanish American War, then you'll be like, oh, I know that. Like, you can kind of put it together and figure it out. You know, there's more to it, but it's a skill, you know, like just using your knowledge of the dates to your advantage to answer questions. Okay. All right. So I will, after I complete this, I'll share with you, or I'll post it on Google Classroom. And then you guys will have these, you can study them. And then of course you can always use that to find the answers to those quizzes. Let me show you. I think you know what I'm talking about, but still. Why do I have so many things open? Hold on. I think this is it. To this right here. Nope. Right here. That will help you with these. So, you know, just learning your dates and things like that. So usually what I normally do, I give these quizzes, I give this to the students, no word bank or anything, and I just have them figure it out, you know, and then until they get 100. If they get a 50, I give them another one, and then they just keep taking it until they master it, but it's just kind of impossible to do that this year. But as long as you do try your best to learn these. Okay, so I'm gonna go pretty fast. In 1898, like I just mentioned, that is and if you know the answers to any of these dates, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm gonna go really fast, so kind of get your answers together already, so that way you can just hit send. 2008, 2001, 1969, 1941, 1929, lots of important dates in history. Okay. 1898, Spanish American War, and then US becomes world power. That's the same idea. And let's not forget Hawaii annex. I spell annex. I'm like so dyslexic today. Well, just 2-year difference from the 1900s. Pretty close. All right, 1914. Does anybody know what happened on 1914? Okay, you guys both know it. Good. World War I begins. What about 1917? Good. US joins World War I because we didn't join from the very beginning, right? And then 1918? Good. World War I ends. Well, the following year, something is signed that ends the war officially. What is it? The treaty, treaties and wars. Treaty of Versailles. Signed. This is the one that punished Germany severely and it causes World War II. 1929. All right. Good. You guys are both right. Stock market crashed. That doesn't even make sense. Sorry. Stock market crashed and beginning of Great Depression. 1939. Good. World War II begins. Yes, and it ends the Great Depression. 1941. Good. All right. Yeah. Good. Good. Attack on Pearl Harbor. By who? Good. Attack on Pearl Harbor. And then, so U.S. joins. U.S. joins World War II. That's only like 3 years later, right? Or 2. And then 1945. Good. End of World War II. Atomic bombs dropped. Yes, Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. 1957. Good. I am very proud of you. Launch of Sputnik. Did you find it in the book? Okay, good. All right, so launch of Sputnik, and that's the beginning of the space race. Yeah. Oh, really? I've seen parts of the first one, but all right, 1968. Good job. Assassination of MLK Jr. Now, you guys aren't using the answer keys, right? You guys learned it all. Good. 1969. All right, awesome. Really? All right, so remember, President John F. Kennedy had promised Americans, because he became president at the start, like around the beginning of the space race, so he had promised Americans that we would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that was our goal. So 1969, first man on the moon, and then we'll just put Armstrong. 1991. All right, good. So the Berlin Wall falls a couple of years before that, in 1989. But they're like dates right next to each other, so it's fine. And you know what? I should put that on there as a date. 2001. All right, 9/11 terrorist attack. Some of you guys are like, it's a conspiracy. That didn't happen. 2008. All right, you guys are both right. Good. First African American president, Obama. All right, extra credit. These are other things that you don't need to know. You don't absolutely need to know, but they're helpful to know. So 1932 was the election of a famous president who got elected for 4 terms. FDR becomes president. All right, you know what? That's actually different, but it's fine. Like the election was in 32 and then he becomes president the following year. All right, 51 to 53 is a little mini war. Happened during the Cold War. It's a small war that's part of it. Huh? Yeah, good. Korean War. And then 1958. Oh, you're close. You are close on that. So there's a date over here, 1957. Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah, no, that happened around the same time also. So 1957, Sputnik is launched, and we respond the following year by creating. Yes, good. All right, so NASA founded. 1961. That is the election. No, a famous person becomes president, but he was assassinated. 1964. No, that's 63. But that's the date that you were telling me about. It was an event, and you're like, it's not in here in the book. And I told you it was a law that was passed. Good. Civil Rights Act of 1964, because there's more than one actually, but that's the main one. And then 1975, the end of an important war that nobody liked. It was very controversial, a lot of protesting towards it. Huh? Yes. All right. Vietnam War. All right. I think we got most of the important events down. Can you believe we've learned a lot of things this year? If you think about it, the STAR is so unfair because it's like you guys are forced to learn like 1,000 different things, but then the test is over like 73 things. But then sometimes you need to learn like 10 different things just about one thing. You know, like if they test you over, you know, the Great Depression, you got to know everything about the Great Depression. There's so much more to it. Okay, so let's see, we have 5 minutes left, and I just want to show you one more thing so that way you can get a head start on learning these, and that is the amendments. You just gotta study. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you know some stuff, some important stuff that's gonna help you. All right, so we're looking at quiz 1, 13th Amendment. 13, 14, 15, all were passed back to back, and this is right after the Civil War. So think of free citizens vote. That was the saying I told you guys to remember. So the 13th Amendment, when I mean free, what does that mean? It was after the Civil War, US Civil War. And it freed the, yeah, yes. Yes, all right. 14th Amendment gives African American citizenship. Gave African Americans citizenship. And then, yes, the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. Yeah. African American men granted right to vote. Yeah. I mean, you can write it however, I just did it like that. Okay, so there we go. 16th Amendment. 16, 17, 18, 19 were all passed by Woodrow Wilson. They're progressive amendments. So the 16th Amendment, what do you guys think? A little later, yeah. So 16th Amendment, think of 16 as the age that people can work and they start getting a paycheck and they start paying what comes out of their paychecks? Yes, that's the income tax amendment. 17th Amendment, direct election of senators by the people. We get to elect them. It wasn't always like that. 18th Amendment in 1918, women wanted this. Good. prohibition of alcohol. 19th Amendment, a year later, 1919, women get the right to vote. Women gain suffrage, I'll put that down, which is vote. 21st Amendment, that is the 18th Amendment repealed. Huh? Yes, it repeals the 18th Amendment, which means makes alcohol legal again. Alcohol legal again. With the new drinking age 21. So that kind of goes. 22nd Amendment. This was passed because FDR did so many terms. All right, you guys are right. So limited terms for presidents to only. 24th Amendment, abolish the poll tax and the 26th Amendment passed during the Vietnam War lowered the voting age to 18. Yeah, 18-year-olds. Exactly. There you go. Those are your amendments.